Hello. This is Simon Brew. I'm the editor of Film Stories magazine, and a very warm welcome to the Film Stories podcast.
Come with me.
And I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
And movies that had stories.
That the story just sucks them in.
This is just the beginning.
Film Stories. We would be honored if you would join us.
Hello, and a very warm welcome to Film Stories with Simon Brew. I am Simon Brew. As always, there's absolutely everything you need to know about me. The aim of the podcast, though, well, I'd get skipping away in the title. I'm here to talk of the stories of films, and I tend to talk about development stories, production stories, release stories, marketing stories, all those ingredients, really, that go towards making the films that we know and sometimes love. Just that, the films that we know and sometimes love. The films I tend to cover on this podcast, they lean more towards the mainstream than anything else. They're films I'm interested in or invested in to some degree. I try really hard not to do snark. I try really hard not to punch down. This podcast is a celebration of cinema and a real appreciation of just how hard it is to get a film off the ground. And that is as much preamble as you get on this podcast. I'm going to move straight into the first of the two films I'm talking about in this episode of Film Stories. I'm going to set it up with a clip from the trailer. We'll come to the story the other side of this.
30 plus years of service. Combat medals, citations. Only man to shoot down 3 enemy planes in the last 40 years. Yet you can't get a promotion, you won't retire. Despite your best efforts, you refuse to die. You should be at least a 2-star admiral by now. Yet here you are. Captain. Why is that?
It's one of life's mysteries, sir.
And that is a clip from 2022's Top Gun Maverick, directed by Joseph Kosinski, screenplay in the end credited to Erin Kruger, Eric Warren Singer, Christopher McQuarrie, story to Peter Craig and Justin Marks, based on characters from the original Top Gun by Jim Cash and Jack Epps Jr., and the cast, led by Tom Cruise, of course, and co-starring Miles Teller, Jennifer Connelly, John Hamm, Glenn Powell, Ed Harris and Val Kilmer. And so the story of Top Gun Maverick goes all the way back to the original Top Gun movie. This was released all the way back in 1986 and, well, it was the film really that turned Tom Cruise into a full-on movie star. It wasn't just Cruise that felt the benefit either. Director Tony Scott suddenly found himself heavily in demand. Producers Jerry Bruckheimer and Don Simpson, they were already riding high off films such as Flashdance, but now they were the go-to pair for a high-concept blockbuster movie. And also it did Navy recruitment no harm whatsoever in the US. So it seemed inevitable for a little while that a sequel to Top Gun couldn't be that far away. Well, bit of a spoiler, it was that far away because it turned into a bit of a tale. So in the aftermath of Top Gun, well, Tom Cruise was doing some interesting work. He took a co-lead role in the Oscar-winning Rain Man, for instance, and he took on one of his boldest parts in Oliver Stone's Born on the 4th of July too. He was interviewed during the promotion of that, just also as he was starting to promote 1990's Days of Thunder. Now, Days of Thunder was a reunion of the Top Gun team. I've covered it before on this podcast, and many kind of glossed over it as it's a NASCAR film, but it's Top Gun really on the road. And so what Cruise told Playboy magazine, I only got it for the articles, was that some people felt that Top Gun was a right-wing film to promote the Navy, and a lot of kids loved it. But he said, I want the kids to know that that's not the way war is, that Top Gun was just an amusement park ride, a fun film with a PG-13 rating that was not supposed to be reality. And it was almost like he was talking it down just a little. He added, as part of that interview, that's why I didn't go on and make Top Gun 2 and 3 and 4 and 5. He said that would have been irresponsible. Now, again, these questions were coming in the context of promoting Born on the 4th of July, a very different kind of project. But still, it was hard to conclude anything other at the end of the 1980s, early 1990s, that Tom Cruise was a long way away from doing another Top Gun film. Now, it didn't stop the questions coming over time, and it took a while, though, for Cruise really to start warming to the idea, because he really started embracing sequels with the Mission Impossible franchise. This was a series of films, of course, of which his production company was involved, that he was producing. And so the very, very expensive big budget Mission Impossible 2, for instance, was the first time really he dived headlong into a sequel to one of his biggest hits. Even so, as that franchise continued to roll, it was a little while until talk of a new Top Gun appeared. It didn't stop questions being asked about it, but it was by about 2010 that it finally looked like Paramount Pictures might be back in the Top Gun game. As The Guardian reported in October of that year, the plan was for Tony Scott to come back and direct, Jerry Bruckheimer to produce. Don Simpson, his producing partner, had passed in the 1990s. And with Tom Cruise and Paramount Pictures now tight again, he was in line to appear. That for a while, Cruise and Paramount looked misaligned after the release of Mission Impossible 3, when the then ultimate head of the studio, Sumner Edstone, made not particularly complimentary remarks about Cruise. Cruise went off to run the latest resurgence at that point of MGM. That didn't quite work out either. And it was the Mission Impossible films getting back on track, I think, really helped grease the wheels to another Top Gun movie. And so here we were towards the end of 2010, and it was Christopher McQuarrie, who was not at that stage directing Tom Cruise movies himself, was in line to write the picture. And as Tony Scott told Hitfix, the idea behind the pitch that they were looking at was involving drones without human pilots, and a kind of focus on the end of an era for the kind of fighting pilots that the original Top Gun movie had done much to celebrate. As Tony Scott said at that point, I'm not waiting for a script, I'm going to do my homework. I'm going down to, I think it's Fallon, Nevada, down near New Mexico, and it's a whole different world now. Warming to his topic, Scott added that these computer geeks, these kids play war games in a trailer in Fallon, Nevada, and if we ever went to war or were in the Middle East or the Far East or whatever it is, these guys can actually fly drones. They are unmanned aircraft, he explained. They operate them and then they party all night. And that's where technology and the perception of war was in 2010. Now, this version of the film, whilst it would have brought Tom Cruise back, the plan wasn't at that stage to have Tom Cruise to outright star in it, that the character of Pete Mitchell would be more in a supportive role, allowing others to step forward, perhaps then take the franchise forward to a Top Gun 3. There had been a little bit of that with the plan for the Mission Impossible series when Jeremy Renner was added to that the feeling was that Cruise would move into the background and Renner would take the lead. But then Cruise, not for the first time, managed to reboot his career, and the popularity of that franchise continues to endure. All that notwithstanding, Jerry Bruckheimer was someone who was having, had a lot of interest in a new Top Gun film. That he'd had a string of successes producing for Disney, not least the Pirates of the Caribbean films, but he was starting to hit the buffers a little bit. He was promoting the film The Sorcerer's Apprentice, for instance, which wouldn't do great guns. He would move on to The Lone Ranger, which wouldn't do great guns. But while promoting The Sorcerer's Apprentice, Bruckheimer said that he'd now been approached about bringing Top Gun back. And so this too was in 2010. And things seemed to be moving. There was a new catalyst in the midst of it as well, a man called David Ellison, who was the co-head of Skydance Pictures, then a very infant studio. Now that Skydance is behind a lot of big films, Terminator films, Mission Impossible films. David Ellison was then in his 20s and was said to be instrumental to the Top Gun project coming back to life. Huge fan of the original film. But still, it felt like the film was quite a way away. Even though, for instance, Tony Scott was talking about it, he was acknowledging he had commitments elsewhere first, including the badly named film Unstoppable. No spoilers, but look at that title, and there's two letters in that seem quite redundant to me. And so it was kind of a project that was bubbling but not at the top of the list. It didn't stop more screenwriters coming in. I mean, in 2011, for instance, Ashley Miller and Zack Stentz, who'd worked on Thor and X-Men First Class, well, they were reported by Variety as being in talks to write a new Top Gun movie. Still unclear at that stage as to the size of Cruise's involvement, but Tony Scott's name was again mentioned as well. However, the story of Top Gun 2 would change dramatically with the tragic loss of Tony Scott in 2012. In the immediate and sudden aftermath of the death of Tony Scott, that's been well reported elsewhere, the idea of another Top Gun was fairly obviously shelved and shelved for a little while. It wouldn't resurface actually for a few more years. It had been one of the last films that Tony Scott was developing before he died. As per a report at Business Insider, Scott had actually spent some of his last days with Tom Cruise scouting possible locations for the film. The script was getting to a place that they were happier with, and there was just felt like that there was movement forward. It'd be another year before we were getting back into Top Gun conversations, though. In 2013, when there was a re-release of the original film, Jerry Bruckheimer was interviewed by Yahoo, and he said that fans of the original, they should be pleased to hear that there is another film coming. That Bruckheimer said at this point he'd wanted to make another Top Gun since the original film first came out. He said, "We haven't given up yet," that direct quote, that the interest was there, but he said it's just figuring out how to do it, which I think we have a good handle on. And losing Tony slowed us down, but hopefully we can pick up speed again. But it wasn't going that fast. I mean, we move forward another year. We go to 2014, and Bruckheimer this time was talking to the Huffington Post, that famous outlet that rose off the back of people writing for free. And he said there, "Don Simpson and I tried to develop something. We didn't succeed. Tom Cruise took over. He tried to develop something. He didn't succeed. But in 2014, he said, we're back at it." And he was asked about what the concept was. And he said, again, it was still the fact that pilots were obsolete because of drones, and that Tom Cruise's character was going to go in and show them that pilots are not obsolete at all. Although in the final film that we ultimately got, it wouldn't be because of drones. Bruckheimer said it's just getting to the starting place in 2014. He said, fortunately for Tom, he's very busy, so you have to find a slot he can fit into and get a budget that Paramount feels they can make the picture. So come September 2014, more recruits. Justin Marks this time had been brought on board to write a fresh contemporary take on the screenplay. Skydance's name was still associated with it. Skydance was clearly going to put some money into the new Top Gun movie. And it wasn't until 2016, though, that Tom Cruise had officially signed on the dotted line to reprise the role of Pete Mitchell. Bruckheimer tweeted as much back when Twitter worked in January of 2016, and Cruise negotiated a deal that gave him a lower than you might think fee, still 8 figures, for starring, but with a chunk of the box office. That would prove to be very, very savvy bargaining on his part when the film ultimately landed. Val Kilmer was soon pushing for inclusion as well via social media. He was in remission from his cancer, and in 2016 he was expressing very definite interest in reprising his role in a second Top Gun movie. But still, we get to 2017 and shooting hasn't begun. There's still script work going on. And Tom Cruise was now very, very open about the film. It did look like the project had momentum, but Cruise was promoting another movie. That would be the remake, let's call it the ill-fated remake of The Mummy. And at that point, he spoke to Access Hollywood about a new Top Gun movie. And he was adamant that at this stage it would not be called Top Gun 2. It would prove that he was right. He says it's going to be called Top Gun Maverick. That was the first time we got confirmation of the title. He says, I didn't want a number. You don't need a number. And the plan was to shoot the film in 2017. But they still needed a director. However, a candidate was just emerging and coming to the fore, and that would be a man by the name of Joseph Kosinski. Now, Kosinski had broken through directing the film Tron Legacy, and then his second movie as feature director was Oblivion, in which Tom Cruise starred. Underrated movie, Oblivion, I'd suggest. He then moved on to the smaller drama Only the Brave, which was co-written with Eric Warren Singer, who we would ultimately recruit onto the Top Gun project. And so it was a case then of Kaczynski was interested, but he and Jerry Bruckheimer needed to go and pitch the idea of where they felt the film should go to Tom Cruise. Now, Tom Cruise was on set of the latest Mission Impossible film at that point. He was filming Fallout, and he was in Paris, and they basically had a half-hour window to go and talk to Cruise about Kaczynski's ideas for the film. It was, once again, the hardly publicity-shy Jerry Bruckheimer explained just how that went in an interview with The Hollywood Reporter. And he said Joseph Kosinski had a lookbook, a poster and the title, and he told Tom the journey of the character and the story he wanted to tell. Now, Kaczynski had actually pitched two different versions of the story to Cruise, but Cruise really locked into one of them. And as Bruckheimer told it, Tom then looked at him, pulled out his phone and called the head of Paramount at that time and said, I want to make another Top Gun. And that was basically that. Tom Cruise was at this stage, and still is really, one of Paramount Pictures' most valuable feature-making assets, really. I'm loath to call a human being an asset, but I seem to have just done that. And at that stage, and arguably still at this stage, he's one of the few movie stars on the planet who could ring up a studio head and say, I want to make this film, and then the studio head jumps and they start making the film. Kaczynski's way into Top Gun, meanwhile, I mean, he'd watched the original as a 12-year-old, and as a 12-year-old, he'd seen that kind of version of the film that Cruise was describing earlier. But when he went back and looked at it, he said he saw the drama a lot more clearly. He saw it as the friendship between Goose and Maverick was at the heart of it, perhaps even more than the romantic elements of it. And he signed on the dotted line. Cruise was happy, Kaczynski was happy, there was a way forward. Christopher McQuarrie was actually asked to come back in and work on the script again. Val Kilmer was confirmed in June of 2018. Miles Teller and Glenn Powell joining the ensemble a month or two later, along with Jennifer Connelly. John Hamm, meanwhile, as he would happily say during the press junket for the movie, he just said yes without reading the script. Do you want to be in a Top Gun film? Yeah, all right. Miles Teller, incidentally, had just worked on Only the Brave with Joseph Kosinski, and so he took on effectively what turns into a co-lead role in the film. And then it was heading to, how on earth are we going to do it? Because they knew going into this that they wanted to do as much of the filming for real as they could. This was going to be an emphasis on practical effects and on stunt work. And so there was an awful lot of planning and training involved. Once again, as with the original Top Gun, they had cooperation from the US Navy. They were hiring fighter planes, names of which I don't quite understand. I don't understand the difference between various nuances of fighter planes, but very posh-looking fighter planes. And the plan early on was, we've got to put the actors in the cockpits with the cameras. They were going to shoot with IMAX as well, so that should make it nice and tricky, which, as you might expect, it duly did. Now, the military had offered cooperation as well, just in the designing of the core mission that was going to be at the heart of the new Top Gun film. And I had the opportunity to ask Joseph Kosinski about this. And so rather than put that in my words, thought I might put it in his.
The mission was designed with the Navy. I asked them the question very early on when the first draft I was doing with Eric Warren Singer, who's an incredible writer. We asked them, what is the absolute most terrifying mission you could ever imagine? And they laid out essentially this mission, 4 planes, low-level ingress into enemy territory, defended by SAMs, through a mountainous valley with a high G pole going into a GPS jam target that requires lasing with a buddy laser. It's like they laid it out. And we were like, great, that's the mission. The one thing they added, which we didn't do, was that, and we do it at night. Can't do that. Not interesting to see it at night, but we'll do it at dawn, So that was the mission. Then we realized the structure of the film would be, we meet Maverick, we bring him back to Top Gun, we train for the mission, we break the mission into 3 pieces, we train for each piece. None of the pieces are working. Maverick puts all the pieces together, proves it can be done. They go, they execute the mission, and then everything goes wrong. That was the structure of the film.
And as you can tell from Kosinski's words, one of the dramatic changes from the earlier versions of Top Gun 2 was now the character of Pete Mitchell was back absolutely front and centre. That the drones had gone, but instead there was the focus on one single mission. Very rare in modern cinema. I think certainly modern blockbuster cinema to be as courageous really as to have one thing done incredibly well rather than have 54 different plots weaving in and out. Now, to make this mission work on screen, though, was taking an awful lot of preparation. It wouldn't just be practical work that needed doing, there would also be CG as well. But the key thing, again, was get those actors in the planes. And they were told to train for that. People who were going up in the planes needed to do 3 months of very, very intense training, led, of course, by Tom Cruise. I mean, stories of Tom Cruise on modern blockbuster movies are legendary just because whatever completely over-the-top stunt or whatever hugely dangerous and life-risking thing to do, I mean, the man just looks like he's first in the queue for it. And so a keen flyer as well. He was, by the sounds of it, very much in his element, but also he was leading the ensemble from the front. That very early aerial work was starting to be shot at the end of May 2018, but filming wouldn't really begin in earnest with the cast until the autumn of that year. I think it was September 2018. But a lot of footage of aircraft in the sky was being captured. The film shot almost exclusively in the California area, so it was very close to Hollywood. So from that point of view, that helped bring the cost down, but everything else seemed to be sending the cost absolutely through the stratosphere. That the final budget of Top Gun Maverick, a fairly princely sum really in the scheme of modern blockbuster cinema, but 170 million-ish, notwithstanding a sizable back end that was heading in the direction of Tom Cruise. So in the end, the filming, even with the IMAX cameras, even with the technical problems and even with the difficulties they had, would capture around 800 hours of material in the air on top of the dramatic scenes on ground. And the idea at this stage was get the film in cinemas in July of 2019. Get Harold Faltermeyer back to do the score. Eddie Hamilton had worked across several Mission Impossible films, so he was on board early to do the edit and just to help get that final cut together. But there were still problems, and the demands of shooting such intense action sequences inevitably meant that the release date was going to be pushed back, that they wanted to make sure they got this properly. The sequences needed to be shot. They needed the footage in the camera. They were up against big superhero films and sequels to films that hadn't come out 30 years before. So they knew that the wow factor of this had to be absolutely through the roof. So the film was pushed back to a cinema release of June 2020, and the plan then was production wrap up in July 2019, and save for an act of God, the film would be released in a very competitive summer the following year. A first trailer landed at San Diego Comic-Con in the summer of 2019. It would be fair to say that ignited a huge amount of excitement for the film. I think quite a few of us were looking at a Top Gun sequel from afar, thinking that might be nice, but it doesn't feel particularly vital as any film could possibly be, of course. But there wasn't a massive clamour for it, really. There was enthusiasm for the first film, of course. It continues to endure. But would people turn up for a Top Gun 2? Well, that trailer and the spectacle in the trailer really did go to the power of a really good piece of promotion. Even as that was going out and playing, though, to go with all the practical footage that Eddie Hamilton and his team were knitting together, there were over 2,000 effect shots that needed to be worked in. In the end, too, it's worth noting that Val Kilmer's voice that you hear in the film would be recreated for the final cut using some kind of AI-ish technology, but that work wouldn't be completed until 2021. That gives you an absolute clue, if you didn't get it already, that the film did not come out in the summer of 2020, even though it was pretty much ready. But the final part of the Top Gun Maverick story, just ahead of its box office, is that delay to get it released. Because few of us really need reminding of what happened in 2020, and then the catalyst of the cinemas closing down and the number of films that started bypassing a big screen release, and how the checkbooks of streaming companies suddenly came into play, as even films such as the James Bond adventure No Time to Die, for a while there was interest in buying that and not letting it anywhere near a cinema screen. Now, Top Gun Maverick was one of the earliest films to be delayed when a pandemic hit the planet. That the release date went fairly quickly from the summer of 2020 to December of 2020. But the delays kept on coming. It went from December 2020 to July 2021 to November 2021 to May 2022. Now, fair dues to the Paramount marketing team, because it kept finding new trailers to cut. Again, you have to give credit there, and also to the people behind No Time to Die, who just seemed to release an endless amount of trailers and still managed to hold some footage back for the final film. There were whispers early on that the film was special, though. That, again, I don't think too many of us went in to see a Top Gun 2 expecting quite the level of what we got. But there were very much early whispers of there's been a cast and crew screening, or some of the people have seen it. I knew one or two people in the industry who were just quite close to the film, were just like, this is actually quite spectacular. And you hear these things, you kind of take them with the requisite amounts of salt. But that chatter kept on coming. Now, against this, Paramount Pictures was one of the many studios that was shifting films that it owned to streaming services and selling them off. But there were whispers that Top Gun might be affected. That Apple was said to be seriously interested in writing a 9-figure check to pick up the new Top Gun movie. But Paramount didn't buckle. Now, a lot of the reason Paramount didn't buckle was apparently to do with Tom Cruise, who was absolutely insistent this had to be seen on a big screen. This was a non-negotiable. We've seen the summer just gone. This has been recorded in November 2023 with Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1, that Cruise, a passionate advocate for the big screen. And here he had a film that was made for the big screen, that he knew it was for the big screen. And again, Joseph Kosinski just explains this better than me about just why that was so important to them.
It's an interest, timing is everything, I think, or it's a lot of it. And at some point I had a concern that, holding the movie for 2 years, that somehow the film might feel like it missed its window, or, that people wouldn't be interested anymore, after hearing about it for so long and not seeing it. But it's been interesting that the pandemic and the state of the world now in 2022 somehow has made the film feel more relevant now than I think it would have. And that's just that's something that you could never anticipate or control or try to game. And it's great that people are really appreciating the idea of a classic film that feels like a summer movie, and they're excited to see it on the big screen.
People finally got their chance to do that in the summer of 2022. That the first official screening of Top Gun Maverick was on April the 28th at the CinemaCon convention in America. And then off it went to the Cannes Film Festival, where it got a rousing reception, particularly for a blockbuster film as well. But it was putting it in front of audiences, really, at the end of May 2022. That's when Top Gun Maverick, off the back of stunning reviews, it should be noted, finally got in front of the eyeballs of the people who would make and break it. And again, spoiler, they would make it. It's hard to understate just how good the reviews for Top Gun Maverick were compared to a lot of blockbuster films around last summer at the point this has been recorded. The opening weekend, May the 27th to the 29th in the US, was off the chart levels of good. There had already been hit movies that summer, and films such as Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, that had made a lot of money. There was also Fantastic Beasts: The Secrets of Dumbledore, which hadn't been a raging success, but had made brought in some money through the tills. The Lost City had come around, Sonic the Hedgehog 2. There was nothing on the level of Top Gun Maverick. Its opening weekend alone was $126 million in the US. A stunning return when you consider just the risk of the project. As much as Top Gun was a known name, there hadn't been a new Top Gun film for, over 30 years. Would people turn up? They turned up in droves. But what was really interesting about Top Gun Maverick is they kept coming and they kept coming and they kept coming. And its first week of release, let's just have a look at that. That in second place, it was number one just by a lot. So it took 126 million. In second place, having been around for 4 weeks already, was Doctor Strange 2 with 16 million. The Bob's Burgers movie, I quite enjoyed that. That opened with 12. Downton Abbey, A New Era, The Bad Guys, Everything Everywhere All at Once was 10 weeks into its run. There was nothing commercially on the level of what Top Gun was doing, nor was there on week 2. And it was the same one too. Top Gun Maverick this time with 90 million, Doctor Strange this time with 9 million. That it was holding its money, Top Gun Maverick, that usually, as I talk often on this podcast, a second weekend drop at the box office of like 40% is great. This only dropped 28.9%. The word of mouth was sensational. Now, it was knocked off the top of the chart a week later by Jurassic World Dominion, which dwarfed its initial takings with an opening of $145 million. Top Gun still managed $50 million in its third week. But, I mean, Jurassic World just didn't hang around as long. That Lightyear opened the week after that with $50 million as well. Top Gun still $44 million on its fourth weekend. And as Jurassic World and Lightyear dropped, Top Gun went back up the chart. And Elvis came along, just held it off. The new Minions film did. But Top Gun Maverick was in the top 10 for an awful long time. Now, by the time it completed its theatrical run in December of 2022, in the US alone, Top Gun Maverick had made $718 million. A staggering number. Even by pre-pandemic numbers, that is a staggering number, a hit that Tom Cruise hadn't seen the like of in his career. And helped too by the fact that Paramount Pictures decided to hold back the home release of the film, that a lot of blockbuster movies were now suddenly going to at least digital download quickly. Not in the case of Top Gun Maverick. They held it back, they held it back, they held it back as the money kept pouring into cinemas. And I mean, the physical media release didn't happen until the very end of the year, really. November of 2022, by which point Top Gun Maverick had done equal money outside of the US as well. Another $776 million. Fell just short of $1.5 billion. A sensational result. I mean, it's hard to understate just what a sensational result it was. And then, just to ice the cake, if you like, come the Oscars, Top Gun Maverick found itself nominated for Best Picture, a sequel to a blockbuster nominated for Best Picture. It was up for screenplay, Best Adapted. It was up for song. It was up for editing. It was up for visual effects. It won for Best Sound as well. But this was the Oscars where two blockbuster sequels made the Best Picture shortlist, the other being Avatar: The Way of Water. I'm a huge fan of Top Gun Maverick. I think it comfortably dwarfs Avatar: The Way of Water. Personally, other opinions are available. This was a massive, raging success of a film. And, I mean, off the back of it, questions inevitably being asked of, will there be a Top Gun 3? Well, no one's answering the question like a year and a bit after the release of Top Gun 2. If it is going to come along, I don't think it's going to take 3 decades to arrive this time. As always, thank you for your time and thank you for listening. Just a couple of parish notices because I'm already running over. If you like this podcast and are interested or wouldn't mind supporting it, you can put money in the till by going to patreon.com/Simon Brew, and in return you get the podcast early, you get it ad-free. Pretty much every week I manage to do that. You also find gossip of what we're up to behind the scenes. So for instance, our new Blu-ray releases of Bull Durham and No Way Out. Patreons have been aware of those for a lot longer. Those Blu-rays are out now in the UK, or just about to be out now. That's the first time either film has been on Blu-ray in the UK. Costing you absolutely nothing is subscribing to this podcast at your podcast home of choice, or leaving a hugely positive review. Things like that really help. If you'd like to come and see me live, I'm in London on the 23rd of November 2023 at King's Place, King's Cross in London. You can find more details there at the Film Stories website, which is filmstories.co.uk. Which brings me to the end of this latest episode of Film Stories. As always, thank you so much for listening and thank you for your time. If I've not bored you completely, you can find more from me on Twitter at Simon Brew. You can find more from the entire Film Stories project as well at Film Stories. I'm on Blue Sky at Simon Brew as well. Film Stories is on Facebook at facebook.com/filmstoriesonline, on YouTube at youtube.com/filmstories. Filmstories.co.uk is now updated with film, TV, gaming stuff as well. That's updated every weekday with as much as we can possibly cram onto it, and we're cramming a lot of stuff onto it. If you go to store.filmstories.co.uk, that's where you can find our print magazines for sale. We have two. We've got Film Stories, which is the latest issue, is 168 pages. It's the UK's biggest film magazine. We're really, really proud of it. That's for sale now. And then we also have what I think remains the world's only film magazine, print film magazine for youngsters, that's also in part written by youngsters as well. It's called Film Junior. You will find that too at store.filmstories.co.uk. But I think I've bored you enough for this week. Thank you as always for listening, and thank you for your time. The most important thing as always is you all look after yourselves and you all stay safe. I will be back soon with another bunch of film stories. Until then, you all take care. Bye bye, and thanks for listening.